Good evening, folks. This is your ticker guy, Carl, coming at you from Niceville, Florida. I wanted to put a little bit more time into the brief interview that I had with Dennis Kneale on CNBC this evening. We didn't get a lot of time, unfortunately. A lot of that had to do with a breaking story that came in directly in front of the scheduled slot that I had. But Mr. Kneale raised 2 points, and I want to deal with them in turn. The first one is the question of anonymity on the internet. Anyone who's been around the internet for any length of time knows that if you're blogging or otherwise putting forward information like this, you're not really anonymous. Yeah, I put my first and last name on things. That's because I've been in the limelight as a provider of internet service for far more than 10 years. In fact, I've been doing this in one form or another since the late 1980s when I ran data over modems. It was back in the day before we had this funny thing called an internet that we all use now. I've been called every name in the book. And it's a good thing that I make my living doing this sort of thing as well as trading for a living because, quite frankly, some of the invective and insults that have been hurled at me over the years would make you blanch, Mr. Kneale. Now, I know that you don't like being called names. Nobody really does. But it comes with the territory. Welcome to being a public figure. I've been at it for far more than 10 years. In fact, I was at it when you were still worried about the tech wreck. Back when the touts were out there pushing every 2-bit company that had a business plan and never had a chance to make any kind of money, yet they sold for $100 a share for a little while. You remember that, don't you, Mr. Kneale? You used to write about the technology area during that time. I remember you well. So the reality of anonymity is that it doesn't really hide anything. If somebody does something that's illegal, you can very easily figure out who they are. And if not, maybe they have a good reason to hide behind a shield of a nom de plume. After all, some of the greatest American patriots that ever lived did so. Do a little reading about the circumstances before and during the Revolutionary War, Mr. Kneale. You'll find that there's quite a bit of information there having to do with great American patriots who, for one reason or another, felt it was necessary to hide behind anonymity and pen names, probably because the king was kind of interested in stringing them up from the lampposts where they posted those bills. We claim to be a more civilized society today. Sometimes I'm not so sure. On to your second point, market manipulation. You asked whether or not bloggers are free to manipulate the market from behind their anonymous screen names. Well, I don't think so. First off, it's against the law, but that doesn't seem to bother anybody that actually does it these days. The thing about being a blogger, or for that matter being online in general, is that it takes time to disseminate your words. If I put a blog post up, it may take people an hour or 2 hours, 3 hours, 15 minutes, some amount of time before it actually hits their computers. It's not instantaneous. But when CNBC pops up with somebody for an interview on their screen, that goes out to 20 million people all at once. It's a very different medium, Dennis. And herein lies the problem. How many times do we have to sit through this within the mainstream media? Anyone remember the interviews, countless interviews, with Angelo Mozillo on CNBC? Remember, Angelo Mozillo said that Countrywide Financial was going to take market share from all of its competitors that were going under, was going to come through this wonderful little crisis as a powerhouse of mortgage lending and would be bigger and better than it ever was before. What really happened, Dennis? Anyone remember Bear Stearns' CEO just a few days before they went under saying they had lots of liquidity and no financing problems? That worked out really well, didn't it? How about Lehman Brothers? You remember Dick Fold? "I'm going to screw the shorts," I think was the quote. Something very close to that. Well, who got screwed, Dennis? Or shall we talk about MBIA and Embed, which was really what I was thinking about when I made the comment on your show that CNBC seems to be involved in more market manipulation than anybody else. Let's be straight here, Dennis. How many times can Charlie Gasparino run the same story at 2:30 in the afternoon when the market is in the process of tanking and send it up 100, 150, 200 points? I'm not saying that CNBC was involved intentionally in manipulating the markets. We don't need that. But it is not at all unreasonable to suggest that perhaps somebody at CNBC, after the third or fourth time the same tired rumor got run from sources we know, and the rescue failed to materialize, that the firm might have stepped back and said, this guy, he's not a very good source. And we're not going to let our reporter go on the air and continue to report something that turns out to be garbage. But no, that never happened, did it? You know, same sort of thing has happened countless other times with so-called breaking information. And the most disturbing part of it is that if you watch the chart very carefully just before some of these things come on your station, you'll see that the buying starts in front of the report. Far be it from me to suggest any specific illegal and improper activity, but it certainly would appear that someone knew that that was going to go on the air. Now, I'm not going to suggest that CNBC had anything to do with it, but how about the guy that you talked to? See, that's the problem. You reach millions of people all at once, but that's not market manipulation. Well, maybe not for you, but how about for the guy that gave you the hint, especially when it turns out to be BS? Millions of people, Dennis, have been wiped out or severely damaged from this economic downturn. It's not over. This is a credit-led recession. I posted the numbers to back up my assertions on my blog yesterday. The problem with all of this green shoots nonsense and all this talk of liquidity and all this talk of buy banks and everything else belies the fact that credit cards are defaulting outright to the point that they're written off. We're talking about charge-offs here, money that will never be collected, to the tune of 10% of the portfolio balance. We're talking about mortgages that are continuing to default. We're talking about people losing their jobs. We're talking about General Motors, Chrysler, and Ford, GM and Chrysler having gone into bankruptcy, that used to run at a 14 million car run rate per year just a couple of years ago, now saying that they believe that a stable and sustainable run rate is 10 million vehicles. It's about a 30% decline. Roughly 10 million Americans are employed making automobiles, or at least were. Where are the 3 million of them that aren't going to be necessary anymore going to find a job? Take the rest of America and apply the same sort of discount factor to GDP that comes out of the auto industry, and you see some truly frightening possibilities. But nowhere does CNBC discuss this. In 2000, prior to the tech wreck, I was warning people about it. In fact, there's an interview that you can still find that was published in a newspaper. Unfortunately, they published it a little bit too late, asking what was going on. If you find the earlier interview from 1999, I said that I didn't think any of these stocks were worth buying at all. CNBC, on the other hand, was cheerleading all the way up until the day that the market finally cracked in the spring of 2000. I remember it quite well. I was sitting in a hotel in Sandestin, Florida, and the look of horror on the faces was something to behold. It was not a surprise to me. I understand that major media outlets don't want to play doom and gloom, but this isn't doom and gloom, Dennis. This is math. Unfortunately, for many people in the media, just as in 2000, Newton's laws of motion still are laws. The laws of thermodynamics still apply. And believe it or not, 2 plus 2 still does equal 4. I would like to see some balance out of the media, including CNBC, regarding how we got into this mess in America and what we need to do to get out. I'm willing to come on your show or any other show within CNBC anytime you would like to debate these points. I will come with nothing other than my wits. No teleprompters, no games. Let's put the cards on the table and let the people decide. Washington has been feeding us all a bill of goods and a lie. It's time to stop. And the buck should stop, Mr. Kneale, with you. Have a good evening.